Welcome to Wickerson Studios. I am moving along with data trees and path mappers and such, and I wanted to highlight after going through David Rutten's scripts, which I actually absolutely believe it's essential to begin even if you're new to CAD design or any program or uploading Rhino for the first time, do yourself a favor, don't do what I did and play around forever. Learn the fundamentals that you can, but get into the path mapper, get into these 3 series of David Rutten's 6 series videos on path mapper and data trees, then go in the mode labs. I'm going to be highlighting mode labs. I've done this in past tutorials, but the more you do it, the better practice you get, and you will be blown away by what your mind is capable of conceiving of and doing. And I'm going to be providing all these files that I've drafted up, and I've made some changes and dealt with the document that is over, technically over, let me see if I can pull it up here, 8 years old. But let me take this off, preview off, and let's just start with the first little script of what's happening. I've got a link in here that you can double click when you get the GitHub file from the GH file from GitHub under M. Wickerson. And I'm going to fly through their video tutorials, these ones. So as I bring them in, let me just get rid of these other ones so we don't have data coming up that we don't need to be looking at. I'm going to pull this over here for a second, but this is where the link would end up going. It will jump in here and you will go into Mode Labs. Mode Lab, you want to go into Intermediate Grasshopper and see where you go very quickly through this series. And we're going to stop a little short, but it's a great 2-3 hour series, and I'm going to try and condense it into these 15-minute summaries, a couple of them. So that said, I'll leave that over here on my other screen, and we'll jump in and show you exactly what's happening here. And I'm going to take off previews as I'm not using them. You can anticipate in here that I will be showing nodes like not only what we've covered with David Rutten's summary of path mappers, relative items, split trees, and relative items versus relative item, but we're going to follow up with pretty much dealing with tree statistics, flattening, shifting paths, simplifying, grafting tree, and stream filters, which is basically a preparation of using the path mapper. This first set, we're 2 minutes in, we better jump into it. What happens is they show very quickly for the novice and beginner, and really get your head around this, inputs and outputs. Know how to look at them through the param viewer, not only as a tree, basically a path with different levels of branches. This has one with one item at the end. You also want to double click and learn how to view these trees and do things. So if I was to do something like possibly graph this, we'll get into that in a minute as this complicates itself. But here's your data. You basically have a point system. Your attributes are these points, and I can move that point. And if you look in the Rhino window, I have control over that, moving it around in the XYZ coordinate. Enough, but you are thinking of panels and param viewers for understanding data. What do you have? What are the indices through the tree branch paths and the different levels there, and then the indices and number of things at the end of those branches. This is all about data trees. So the next section is quite simple. We'll take this and we'll put it off. Load up the second section, and you'll see what happens here. Preview on. I've gone in, done the same thing, made a series of points that has a start, step, and count, and then I allow it to change in the Y direction, so I have control over it there. Now, what happens with this is I move from the type of data I had before to a single item. Now I have a list. So they continue through that. We'll take this off, and I'm going to go fairly quickly. Preview off. We're going to go in and show you the first use of a path mapper, which is essential. Preview on. We have a series from start, step, and count. We're putting it in and into a path mapper and hitting null mapping. And what they do is they actually don't do null mapping. They take what happens in null mapping, and I will show you briefly what this is. Let me copy, bring this data up here and do a null mapping and say, okay, we have 2 branches, 2 levels of branches, and no indices are listed. But if we look at the data, we'll find out very quickly on a param viewer what exactly is there. And you'll see you have 2 paths, 0 and indicated 0 and 0 with 7 items on each. Well, what's happening is they've gone into the param path mapper and they've taken that indice by typing this in and changing the script, going in and putting in an I, and then they brought I in as another level of the branch. So that basically puts all the items on their own branches, and you're left up with this data. And now you have, instead of a list, you have a list of single items in lists. And you're getting farther and farther down the rabbit hole, and you fully want to watch these videos and coincide this script alongside, and I've made a few corrections if necessary. Preview off. Let's go farther in. Let's go here to the next video, and they talk long and they give lots of examples and lots of details. I'm not doing that. We go into 2 series that start at 0, and I brought it into Path Mapper, and there it is with a grafted tool that I can look at my XYZ coordinates as a list, but I could always take one of those grafted points and put it in here and end up now with something beyond a list of single item lists. I actually have a list of lists, and I can control each one of these rows as a column. Whatever I do to one of the rows, I do to the column. And you'll see if that is a system that actually works in a sense with the param viewer to give me two pieces of data, you're going to realize that I can start to flip matrix on this and swap my columns for my, I can swap my branch levels with my indices for the count. And what I'm going to do here is just do a quickly simplify and see if I can get that down to 2 items. And if that's the case, when you simplify, you will be able to flip this data and not only interpolate these lines in the columns, you could flip the data and actually go in without a path mapper and do the lines in the other direction. You'll see some great applications of this in here. So I'm just going to continue. Sorry I'm talking fast, but I'm dreadfully excited about this. I think everybody needs to wrap their head around this. This is the future for me, going back to school and teaching and thinking of teaching parametrically outside of CAD or CAM, but getting into the sense of programming. Beautiful geometries that your algorithm could satisfy a car, a house, a structure, a jewelry, a pair of shoes, a sculpture. When you get into this, you have immense, speedy, powerful computer control. It's the future. Need to do it. I'm going to turn that off. Now we're going to go down here, and I played around a little bit beyond what they were doing, and I'll try and show this as a preview on. And I brought in 2 series with a number count. I put them through the tools that are in the list and did a holistic. I'm going to have to put this on here so I can actually see just what I'm clicking. I put it through a holistic cross-reference and ended up isolating them. I did a longest list and I did a shortest list. You can see how the data differs, but I also wanted to put it through the graph mapper and show exactly what's happening holistically. If I was to go into these points and make a grafted system, and you're saying, well, what's the difference between these two? You'll see that these two, as point counts, if I run them through the top one, you'll see that I've got it counting from 1 to 9 on this level. And then if I was to plug in the other one, you'll see I've changed the direction. So I've actually used the path mapper to flip matrix, which is an interesting way of turning rows into columns and columns into rows. And you'll realize that's very useful for fabricating on a, say, waffle pattern for finding geometries. That's enough said. I'm going to use another example down here, preview off, and I have a little example here that I was having fun. And I went in here, and I'll show you what I did. I'm wondering why the preview isn't off. Let's go into here and show you this script that I just played with. Now, this isn't on the ModeLabs, but I think it's a fun little exercise. I'm going to move my paper so my thing works a little better. And I'll also take off this thing so we can take a look at what we have ungroup. And what I have is a series, and I show you the param viewer says that's a number. That is basically one piece of data at the end of one branch. I then go on and make a point, which is still one piece of data at one branch. But actually, because I plugged in 2 x values, I've actually pulled in 2 points. So I have one branch with 2 items on the end of it, and they're very close together, and there they are. I did a polar array of those, so now I have a param viewer that says I have 2 paths with 10 items on each because of the polar array. I have the inner one and I have the outer one. It's kind of hard to spot here, but it's there. And then I'm going to move that one up in a lofted direction on a Z series with start step count. And now what do I have? I now have 2 branches again. 0, 0, and 0, 1 that have 10 items on each. In doing so, I can use the path mapper just to gain access to the data and show it. I now have 10 branches as I lofted 10 times through a series with 2 items on each, which gives me, and it's hard to see because the geometry is not there, I'd have to go back to it, basically 2 points that are paired together that if I do something to the one and the other, I dispatched it, grabbed 10 in one set, 10 in the other, so I've got 1 branch, 10 branches with 1 item each, 10 branches with 1 item on each, and I bring them into a line structure, which then makes me 10 things with 1 item on each, but they happen to be lines, not points. A great system to wrap your head around this, a nice little exercise. I then flattened it, which then makes it 1 branch with all the items on it, and I lofted them together, and I get this wonderful ribbon tool. I have parametric control, and I'm right back down to 1 item with 1 object, and that's created by understanding the path mapper, understanding the nodes, and understanding the data. Please have a look at that and play with that. We're at 9 minutes right now. Data trees come from the term tree, which is encoding dealing with trees. I'm going to take this quickly and see how far I can get here in 15 minutes. Preview off. And once again, I'm talking at the pace of Wickerson. So you're going to have to slow this down or follow me through in my classes. And I'm starting to think of doing more and more on Patreon for individuals. If you really want to understand this, I will walk you through it. Previews on. What I did was I went a data tree and I basically made a grafted set of points, which I showed earlier farther up. I grafted it a second time in the sense of taking my points out of here and showing that as a structure of lists, And then in grafting, I took all those items and put them all under their own list of lists. And this is a way to count the points and change it to 0, 0 count on each one, as opposed to the points being numbered as rows and columns. I then show how that param viewer is represented by a 70 branches with one item on each. And you see there's no real point. You'd want to kind of simplify this. And I go into the tree stats, and actually I should say they do, because they do a great job at it. The tree stats allow you to gain access to the paths, gain access to the, and I should show samples of this, the length of those, and gain access to the count. And in doing so, they're then able to use a text tag so you can actually find out not just the branch paths and levels, but the indice if you were to graft it again. That you now have points that you can fully pick and choose whatever you want in your geometries. And this is the power of getting into tree statistics and dealing with things beyond the tools that they provide you simply in the sets trees. We're at 11 minutes. I best continue. That's a lot. That's very fast. It's hard to wrap your head around, but follow the videos and have these shots beside you. I probably am not going to get through all this other data. We're at 11 minutes. They get into manipulating data trees, and I think we'll try that one before we wrap up. Here we go. We're going to go in again, preview on, take off this other section. I build 2 series. I end up with a grafted tree once again to start. I have my points, and I want to show you how that series moves from one branch with 7 items onto it to grafting it once again. So I have 70 branches with 1 item on each, but you can follow the levels of that path through trunk, branches, smaller branches, and then items that are at the list end. And then I can offset that, which means I technically can shift this data, which is hard to think about. I can pull on these rings data from up here down onto here. I can pull it back all the way to here if I want. So using the shift path tool, you can plug in, and you'll notice this tree is 70 branches with 1 item each. If I pull it back 1 branch, I'll get 7 branches with 10 items each. But if I pull it back 2 branches, I'll get 1 branch with 70 items each. And the tree changes from looking like that into something like that. But if I only pull back 1, it would be there. You could always do the effect of what shift paths does. And of course, the path mapper allows you to go deeper and deeper and deeper into that you're not reliant on those single nodes that are here. You're doing most of your work right in the path mapper, probably in the split tree or in the relative items, which I've touched on in this video. We'll end up getting there. Before we go, we have 2.5 minutes. Let's at least get us caught up to advanced data trees and get into going further into manipulating data trees. Let's grab that, and I want to show you an example of what's happening here. Preview on. This is a nice example again. Just grab yourself some cells. There's points at the end of those. They come up as 6 branches with 6 points on each, so 36. And you can see that's written right here. And I've left the data tree visualization up. What happens when you graph? You then take those and you put every item in the red onto its own branch. So you're left with 36 branches with 1 item each. I do the offset, which defaults to -1. And it might be nice if I just hit, I'm just going to type in a fast tool that gives me a number 1. Basically, that's the data that's in there. And it will shift me back to 6 branches with 6 items. At that point, they go in and they simplify the tree to knock out all of these paths that don't change, and they make this tree look like this tree because they've knocked off the trunk and bigger branches, and you're left with the branches holding those 6 items. So it's like you pick the flower, and you have the petals at the end of your flower, as opposed to digging up the whole tree that it was flowering off of. Then when they flatten, they go back to taking all those flowers and putting them in a bouquet of just 36 items in a vase. Great examples. I'm going to take you down to there. We'll start again in advanced data trees. We'll go farther into maybe creating clusters, and there'll be a whole other video on the path mapper. So 15-minute summary of, like I said, this incredible supplementary to watching these videos. They provide it themselves, but with me, you can reach out, you can talk to me in person, get to know me, and we can answer questions directly in real time, because this video, like I said, is 8 years old, and the people making this are well on in their careers and gone farther in their lives. And you'll see that even in that, they've had 8,000 views just to these videos alone. And I'll be wrapping my head around the data trees coming out with Daniel Christev again in the same full detail after this series. Thanks very much for watching. Michael Wickerson, Wickerson Studios, over and out.